Hello and welcome to the Animation Communication Podcast, for your source of discussion about animation, film, fandom, and more. So please join our host, I Love Kim Possible a Lot, or KP, and Lyle Convoy, or Lyle Manbad. This episode contains some mild adult language.
Hi everyone, welcome to this week / month / whenever the schedule will let us record a new podcast episode. So, Lio, I don't know if you've noticed, but you've your little lion man is starting to go on all the new branding stuff. So, how do you feel about that?
Well, you have very skilled artists on your team, so it's always neat to take a look at. I obviously need to promote this stuff more on my end, so I apologize for that. But since we're talking about branding and whatnot, it looked like you had a bit of a hiccup in your channel this past week or two.
Oh, well, why don't you introduce yourself first for people who aren't familiar with you before we go into that?
Okay, I am Lyle Convoy. I run a YouTube channel where I would prefer to talk about cartoons and action figures, but 9 times out of 10, I gotta deal with the stupids. But my passion is in animation, art, and, well, action figures. So that's who I am, and that's what I do.
Yeah, and then he's old. Those are his 2 character traits. So.
Yeah, I need a walker. I know.
Okay, so yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are listening to this are just going to be like, your channel got hacked. So, let me just start off by saying, I don't know if I've mentioned this, relatively recently, but YouTube's been kind of a trip for me lately. The channel's, I've almost been uploading for 10 years now. I can't really so especially post pony stuff, I feel like people don't know to pay attention, or they take the channel for granted, or whatever. The view count for the channel has been shitty for the last 2 or 3 years. I've wanted to have growth, and that hasn't happened at all, and there's even been some reverse growth going on. So it's just been, I still like doing it for the most part, but it's just, sometimes it's an uphill battle to be relevant. So that's why I have to, that's why I do the collabs. I mean, not all the time, but it's a helpful part of doing collabs and being like, hey guys, remember me? I exist. For those who don't know, I guess, all 2 of you who, listen to the podcast but don't, pay attention to the things that are happening on the social thing. One of the dogs outside are barking, so I don't really have any control over that right now. So my channel got hacked, which has never happened before. So basically I had no control over it. I have 2... For people who care about the boring stuff, logistics of it, I have 2-step verification on my account that's associated with the channel because yes, that's important. And this person was able to get around that somehow. I checked the Google logs to see if there was a IP address that this person was coming from that was trackable, and there was not a VP address provided, so I don't know where this person came up. But anyway, I basically woke up to Eddie, if you don't know them, one of my 2 other YouTube friends. So Eddie and Riddle, of all people, saying, hey, your channel got hacked. I'm like, what? And this person was streaming a live stream about cryptocurrency or some bullshit. I don't know. Crypto itself has always just been a dumb idea to me. Well, not as dumb as the what is it? The AI art, or what's the thing, Laya? The thing that people make art and they sell the
NFTs.
NFT, yeah. So the only the only thing I use NFT is when I'm dealing with Toby and I say NFT, not for Toby. So, that's my integration of NFT. I've been meaning to make a TikTok on it or something, but I don't know. I don't really I work very hard on my own content. Doing extra content like TikTok and stuff is just makes me tired thinking about it. Anyway, so in our investigation of this nonsense, we found the person who hacked also did this to another channel involving like ammunition, like something that's totally not related to us at all, like, you know, like someone who does like those gun tests and does like, you know, can this rifle hit this target at 35 miles? I don't know anything about ammunition. Same with cars. I know the car is a car. But anyway, and the content itself is actually from another channel that probably doesn't have anything to do with the account. So, like, my head and I don't really understand the point of this if it's not this person's content to be hacked, unless it's just a troll. Like, I don't know what they're benefiting, stealing content from other people to live stream on other channels or something like that. So, I don't have, everything isn't 100% fixed, so I'm kind of waiting for things to be 100% fixed before we do anything. So that's been a lot of emails back and forth between me and Mysterious YouTube that really won't give me any more information than what they're, I mean, to be fair, they've been pretty fast and, you know, but, like, I don't have a name of the person I'm talking to, and, like, the issue is, like, when I asked about it, they were just like, here's your issue number in case someone else needs to handle this. And I'm just like, okay, I guess. So, like, I don't know. But yeah, this has never happened before. And, like I've talked about before, or what I just talked about, the take it for granted thing, like, I was a little surprised by how many people were reaching out and being like, your channel got hacked, your channel got hacked, your channel got hacked. And I'm just like, oh, thanks for caring. So, I guess, you know, because I think, you know, it's part of the mindset of, like, when, you know, like, just like any show you watch, if you've been watching, you know, any show that's been on for as long as I've been making content, I think you kind of take it for granted at a point. You're just like, oh, that person's making content. Oh, that South Park's still going. Oh, The Simpsons is still going. So you don't really, people don't really think about it until that thing that they take for granted might potentially be lost to them to all time. And I also don't really account for the people that are rewatching the pony videos, like, on playlists just to kind of, as, like, you know, while they're drawing or working or something like that. I don't really think about people rewatching the pony videos for reasons like that. So, you know, I said, like, in my deadpan tweet, it's like, oh, it's like the one time people hated me, except no one's telling me to kill myself. Yeah. So, I'm hoping, you know, I'm hoping this will all have a positive effect at the end of the day, and, you know, like, we'll probably make a video about this, and people are like, oh my god, I'm so glad your channel's back, and I'm like, yeah, you should watch it more often instead of just this one time. We work hard. So, and then, you know, between that, we've had a lot of bad luck with team recruiting lately, where people are just like, I mean, in general, not only is it hard to find people who are wanting to work for free for various reasons, obviously, but, you know, when we do scouting now, and when we do scouting, I think some people think it's I'll apply and get an interview and just see what happens, not really accounting for, like, if this is, like, they can fit into their schedule, they're motivated, they feel like dealing with it, you know, that kind of stuff. So we get a lot of people that are like, I'm here, and then I'm just like, oh wait, I don't have time for this. I'm just like, then why did you apply? Just don't apply. Or just say no, like, you know. So, you know, that's also, like, if you still want KP content, remember, we need editors. So, you know, if you're not an editor and you don't know how to do that stuff, at least, like, spread the word when we're looking, or else there won't be more content. Like, that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. Again, I think people just take it for granted, and they don't think about, you know, this stuff is work. So, there's my old man rant, but that's basically what's been happening so far. But I do appreciate everyone who's been supportive and commenting and telling me and yelling at YouTube, and, you know, it is nice to feel appreciated, for the first time in a while. I mean, it usually happens at conventions, but I haven't been booked for a convention lately because we haven't been spending time on marketing because we've been dealing with this. So it's a mess. This is fine mess. So yeah, there you go, Lio, and people listening.
Well, I'm glad you got your channel back, and I'm glad you had some backing for it, because I know when we found out in Senate, people started tagging you, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure she probably knows by now, guys, okay?
Like that was the thing that kind of took me off guard is, because like I don't really talk in there that often because like people scare me, especially people like, it's just my trauma brain comparing like, aggressive people to people that are potentially mean for mean things. So I would like, I think a lot of the reason people like me too is because we're friends. So like, let's be real.
Well, I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think in some cases, because you're so used to, again, aggressive people being bad, that you're not expecting the type of kindness they can give you. And people can say what they want about the place, but when there's somebody who needs help, if we're able to grant that help, and it's not somebody who's an immoral scumbag, we'll do what we can. That's kind of what we've done, like for the 3 years almost that we've been in operation, if we can help it. There are of course hiccups here and there, but that's just what we do. But
yeah,
let's go ahead now and go ahead.
I was like, yeah, that's fair. Maybe I'm probably not giving it enough credit, but yeah. I don't know. Yeah, again, trauma brain. Everyone hates me. Everyone, I want to hide because I work really hard on this channel, and no one cares. Kind of like, I know that's like, again, exaggerating it and being very pessimistic about it. There's another word I was looking for, but I can't think of it right now. Like a psychological like. But anyway. Cynical about it. There you go. That's the word I was looking for. Cynical. But yeah, like sometimes, my mental health's crap, so sometimes it'd be like that. And I have to kind of work myself out of my brain space, that's what therapy's for. Yeah,
essentially. Okay, so you want to go ahead and get into the news?
Yeah, we'll talk about the news for the news thing. So, the first, we haven't done a podcast. I mean, we like the art episode of this recording was put on the places like a week or two ago. But we haven't actually recorded an episode in a while because the aforementioned shit that has hit the fan. So it's been a little while since because of that. Since it's been a little while, there's some good stories because we don't have to just pick something that none of us know anything about because we need a story. So the first story I wanted to talk about is the Pinocchio winning the best, so the Oscar, for those who don't know, this is the Oscars are crap. It's all Adam Ruins Everything, that show guy, does a bit about this. It's on YouTube if you're curious. But the Oscars are crap because they're just motivated by companies trying to win Academy Awards to increase the revenue of the movie that they're marketing. So there's there's points here and there where there's merit in the in highlighting the artistry of specific movies, but that's also that's also a big part, straight up rivalry is also a big part in the Oscars. So that's why I don't really take the Oscars seriously. It would be nice if it was taken more seriously because from an animator's perspective, I consider myself an animator. I've animated before. I know how to animate. It would be good, representation for animation in general, and Eddie did a really good video that I haven't watched yet, but it's about, how people just, even people within the Academy, which is the thing that chooses the stuff, doesn't really take animation seriously, which doesn't make any sense to me, because if you work so hard to be in this industry, and this industry has something that's a different medium, like I would think you'd be open to said medium if you've worked so hard to be in said industry. But what do I know? I'm just a YouTuber. So do you have any thoughts on that, Lio, before I continue my... This is the old man rant episode right now that I'm doing. And then we'll turn to your old man rant, so it'll be great.
I think that people who are in animation, whether it be as fans of animation or as people in the industry, they concern themselves too much with the Academy Awards. Because to be completely blunt, the Academy Awards, the Oscars, all those things, the people who run them aren't exactly the most morally, like, decent people.
No way.
The people they've known about, the people they haven't reported, the people they cover for. Personally, my value is I'm not going to sit here and worry about whether or not I get validation from some man-made nonsense that has not served its actual purpose in probably decades, if ever, being, championed by a bunch of nitwits that are more interested in the concept of what they consider to be art without actually doing any introspective deep dive into it. They can sit there and they can, give the James Bond movie 567 an Academy Award and not something brilliantly directed, voice acted, animated, and story. If they want to, that's on them. I don't see the point in chasing after something just for the sake of being listed on it, because I don't find any value in the opinions and thoughts of these worthless individuals. But that's also my value, and I'm an old curmudgeon, so...
No, I mean, my point in all this is, so Guillermo del Toro, which is, he's at the top of his game, as they said right now. He's won Best Director for Pan's Labyrinth, which is, like, people can't, or it was a mind blower at the time, because, like, keeping all this in mind that we just said, like, he won best, he's generally considered a good director from all accounts, not just, like, the Academy, because, like, Anyway, so he won Best Picture for Pan's Labyrinth, which is a Spanish film, it's in Spanish from what I remember, and that is a big deal, because usually foreign films, like, don't usually get the mainstream awards. They usually get the best foreign film or best documentary. People don't. You're like, another language. Ew. It's kind of a similar, a similar problem. But anyway,
yeah.
But then he won for, and I haven't seen any, so I haven't seen Pan's Labyrinth. I know I should, and I haven't, Shape of Water won, which is about, I don't know, it's about a guy or a girl who falls in love with the fish man, I think. So that also won for Best Picture, which is, Best Picture is the biggest award in case people care. And then he, recently of this, for, I think it was, 2 weeks ago or something. Math is hard. But he recently won for his own version of Pinocchio, and and then I watched it because I was like, wow, he seems like a cool dude. And he spent his acceptance speech basically saying what we're saying, where animation is a medium, it's not a genre, please take animation seriously. And for such a mainstream success, I'm using air quotes, but mainstream successful director to spend his speech, even though it's his third one, but spending his speech to just make that statement, I was like, I respect him now. What a good bean. So then I watched Pinocchio because of that, and then Pinocchio is a deep movie. So, and even the interviews leading up to it, and if people don't know anything about the funding, then I had to look up. Basically, it was announced in 2008 or something. And then it was in production or development hell for a while, which is a term basically that, no one's making it, no one knows what they want to make it. And then they were shooting for a release date around 2013 or 14, and then that didn't happen. And then Netflix, of all companies, swooped in and said, we're going to fund this because stop motion is expensive, and people don't want to spend money on it if they don't have to, because if you don't know anything about how stop motion works, you have to build everything traditionally. So, including the sets and the props and blah, blah, blah. And, so it's a lot of physical, artistry going into stop motion, and that's why, as much as people fucking love Nightmare Before Christmas, that's why stop motion only video or movie only ever comes like once, maybe once a year, once every other year. Like we had 2 this year. We had this one and we had Wendell and Wild, which I really like, which also had death themes. So, death theme is good, one of my favorite artistic motifs. So eventually I'm hoping to do like a standalone episode where we talk about it, but it's interesting because Guillermo, not the one from Jimmy Kimmel, but anyway, he wanted to make this movie like forever, and he loves the Disney version, and it's obviously, has elements of the Disney version, and I'm sure that's why studios were so hesitant to fund it, is even though this is a big director, like an A-list director, quote unquote, his movies will make money. At the end of the day, that's what it is. His movies will make money. They were just like, do we really need another Pinocchio? Like, the Disney version is pretty cemented, as most Disney versions of popular things are. We're going to spend all this money on all this fucking stop motion, and we're just going to get a different version of Pinocchio. So I think that was kind of the internal mindset of it before people were like, let's look at the motifs, and let's look at the themes, and let's look at the theme of death and reincarnation. So I think it's an interesting case study in that sense of like taking a well-known movie that's in public domain that Disney has already made it their own version of, and doing something different with it, different enough that people are like, oh wow, my expectations were 0, and you did something significantly different than my expectations. Wowie zowie. So it is possible, but it sure is damn hard to try to make any, public domain story popular that Disney has already made, especially with all the things, the word I'm working, the bootlegs, the bootlegs. So, that's also not helped, anything as far as that space. But anyway, that's a lot of talking. Do you have any thoughts? I know you haven't seen the movie, but do you have any additional thoughts you want to throw in, Lio?
No, not specifically on Guillermo or on Pinocchio as a whole. I again haven't seen it, so I don't think it would be reasonable to give my thoughts on something I haven't seen. I haven't even seen the trailer for it. So.
Oh, okay. Well, you should told me we could have watched it before. But anyway, it's a good movie. 10 out of 10. If you like being like, it's not like it's a little bit of a depressing movie, I won't lie, but like Pinocchio as as a story is kind of depressing in general too, because I always make jokes about like how they never, in the Disney version, they never go back to save the boys that were on Pleasure Island,
Yeah.
Anyway, what's the next story? What's the next thing?
Okay, so we have DreamWorks Teenage Kraken coming out, which seems to be, again, as is often with a lot of modern interpretations, a bit of a subversion, where they are switching in terms of what's considered the hero or the villain in the classic stories, to where the mermaids, you go further back, mermaids aren't heroes in any way, shape, or form. It's more of a modern Disney invention. But where krakens are like the protectors of XYZ thing, and mermaids are the troublesome, destructive forces of evil. And it's about a young teenage kraken that can blend in with humans, and it's a coming-of-age story where she's trying to figure out what her abilities are so she can stop some mermaids.
Gotta stop the mermaids. But I think it's interesting just because they purposely made the main mermaid Ariel adjacent. Essentially, she's got red hair and blue eyes, and she's got the I think she's got a green or like kind of a light green top that goes with Ariel hair, and I'm just like, I see what you're doing, but like me being a total Ariel nut job, I was just like, no. I like that aesthetic. That's why it's all over everything in my room. But I guess we'll see what happens because, like, I don't know if the market is ready for, like, another coming-of-age story. Or, I don't, like, I guess it just depends as far as release, as far as oversaturating the market. So I guess we'll see what happens with it. I am not really, my expectations are not so high for it, but at the same token, I think, because DreamWorks is just so hit or miss, like, we'll have like masterpieces like Prince of Egypt, and then we'll have the Snail movie, and stuff like that. So I do think it would be better. I mean, me being just a nobody, to establish like a tone in DreamWorks besides just like, hey, you do you. We'll insert joke. That was probably a bad explanation for it, but we'll see. So I know Lauren's been talking about it, and she's like, oh yeah, it's the trailer's released. It's a thing that's happening, and I'm just like, I see, get it, I see, because it's a sea theme. Do you want to talk about the turtle thing? Right, you like turtles?
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about the turtles. All right, so. It's been announced previously that Seth Rogen is working on a new Ninja Turtle film, and the trailer for it dropped a few weeks ago. It seems to have the turtle, it's called Mutant Mayhem, and it seems to have the turtles much younger than we're usually seeing them. I'm guessing they're like late into their 12th year or 13 years old, very much so acting like the typical teenagers. The voice cast is very interesting. We have Jackie Chan playing Splinter.
What?
We have Bebop. Yeah, we have Bebop and Rocksteady voiced by Seth Rogen and John Cena, respectively.
Oh, no!
Yeah. And, of course, the internet's upset because April this time is not only black like she was in Rise, but apparently she is not attractive, which is going to upset people.
Oh, no! She's not attractive.
Yeah, my value is I just don't find the design like visually appealing. Like I can even say with the turtles that they're unique to look at. I can tell their personality by looking at them, not so much with April, and it's just a weird decision made. But it's Seth Rogen, so of course the decision's going to be weird. I'm going to see if the film's going to surprise me, because with Turtles, there's only two things the Ninja Turtles have done that I've never looked in on. One was The Next Mutation, the live-action show that premiered in 1997, and one was the Coming Out of Their Shells tour, because why would I be interested in that? I've seen, in one manner or another, all of the Ninja Turtle cartoons, all four of them that have come out, which means I've seen the original 87 cartoon, the 2003 one, the 2012 one, and Rise. Enjoyed all of them to various degrees, because they're all different creatures in and of themselves. Ninja Turtles is something that's probably never going to go away, one way or another. It's always going to be able to be reinvented because of the nature of the show, the type of characters they have, the dynamics they're in, and all the adventures you can do. You can do just about anything with a Ninja Turtle story. You can do time travel, you can do space adventures, you can do classic noir tales, you can do martial arts adventures, teenage comedy stories, you can do literally anything with Ninja Turtles. I don't think that was intentional when it was created, but it certainly has served it well this past 40 years. So we'll see if it's any good when it comes out.
Yeah, the joke I made earlier is like, I don't really Seth Rogen, like, I'm not really a fan of Seth Rogen. Like, he's just like a slightly Jewish Sabersburg to me, and like I have a bad taste in my mouth when I think about that in general. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. I don't know. I don't think Seth Rogen's fine, I guess. Like, Sasha's party was pretty, as bad as probably I was expecting it to be. It just seemed a lot of like gross out sexual references. Like, I didn't really consider Sausage Party particularly clever, and I wish they use their resources to make like something like Pinocchio, where they can still be raunchy if they want to, but that shouldn't be the main thesis of the movie.
Well, I think that might be beyond Seth Rogen's intellectual ability.
No shade, but...
No, I mean all shade. I mean like forest in the middle of high noon shade. Screw that guy. Dude sits there and like bullies a literal teenager on Twitter. What is wrong with that guy?
So, like I said, the only thing he's got going for him is, I guess, the Jew. So, power to that. You know,
You can say that because you're Jewish.
yeah,
I couldn't get away with that.
I say, like, instead of Jewish, I say Jew, but I also, like, feel like it's kind of N-word privileges, where I can kind of simplify that. But, I've been bat mitzvahed, I've been confirmed. I did my fucking time to be able to make those kind of jokes. So thank you. I'm thinking about doing a comedy bit where it's just like, man, I had to spend, I don't know, 4 or 5 years learning this language that I don't understand. It's the most useless skill ever. Let me tell you.
Oh Lord.
I understand how it's good, what's the word? Culturally, but man, anyway.
Well, we're about the halfway mark, so we should probably delve into the main topic of today.
Yeah, I guess. So, this is Sit Back, Everyone, the Old Man Tale. So we're talking about 80s cartoons, which I imagine most of you, including me, were not born during the 80s. So I was just kind of curious as far as like how the cartoon language worked back in the day, because I think everyone's just used to streaming and used to being able to binge things. And, a lot of older shows are coming up and becoming more popular now because of it. So it's just an interesting, and especially Pony, all of Pony's success was because it was able to be pirated and distributed like back in the early days, and that's how people discovered it. So, Lio, tell me adventures while I eat my burrito.
Okay. Long ago in a distant year, it was 1981. And I'm dropping it for the rest of that to save my voice. But 1981, hate to go a little bit into politics here. It's not a political argument, but just a basic fact of what happened then. Back in 1981, the Reagan administration deregulated children's cartoons. And what I mean by that is, up until 1981, I can't remember when it started, but up until 1981, children's cartoons could not be used in any way, shape, or form to sell a product to a kid, regardless of the reason. And if you look at some of the early stuff in the 80s, like Super Friends, for example, by Hanna-Barbera, Super Friends had an adjacent toy line called Superpowers. And they were a little sneaky with it because there was no crossover between the show and the toy line itself, but a lot of the characters from the show were in the toy line. And you saw other companies like Marvel do something with Secret Wars, where they had a toy line it made as well, but that was a comic book, so they could get away with it more. But what happened was those sanctions were lifted in 1981 by the Reagan administration. And believe it or not, it wasn't immediately out of the gate, where people were just slinging out animation to try to sell things to kids. That's a common misconception that comes from a lot of people who are cynical, or they get their opinions from John Kay's blog, unfortunately.
Is he still around?
Unfortunately.
No.
And we'll get into him shortly in terms of how people tend to view the 80s in terms of animation, because a lot of people list it as the dark ages of animation, and none of them have actually done a lick of research about what the dark ages of Dick all is.
The only thing I think of, not to interrupt, but the only thing I think of is that 80s short where they have all the cartoons singing about not to do drugs and stuff like that, like the super crossover thing.
You can thank Bush Sr. for that one. That was his love child.
I'm all for mass crossover things. Like that's what I want to do if I break into the industry one day, hopefully. But there has to be kind of order to the chaos, because if you just throw in a bunch of cartoons and just, it's too much. It's too much IP. Similar with House of Mouse, where there was at least a little bit of order. Like there was at least a little bit of setup.
That was a good show.
Yeah.
But anyways, the first big breakout that to this day still has ripple effects in the animation industry was done by Filmation. Filmation was a well-known cartoon making studio at the time, who got the job to animate Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. And the fun story about that is, like, they had to convince the IP owners that they had a studio, even though it was in their garage. So they were able to somehow convince them of all that, and they got the IP and ran with it. So between Hanna-Barbera and Filmation, animation in the Western sphere for television animation, they were like the only big dogs there. To the point where I think Hanna-Barbera had 90-something% of the market, and Filmation had the other 10%. Filmation had done shows like, the Cosby Kids. He did Black Star. They did a few really well animated shows. But the big breakout hit of 1983 was He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Now, I'm not going to sit here and play pretend that He-Man's primary interest in terms of what Mattel, the brand owner, wanted was to sell toys. But the truth of the matter is, when it comes to Filmation's head, Lou Scheimer, who was behind the entire production, he has gone on record, and there's still a clip I posted out about it on Twitter a while ago. That man did not care dick all about what toys they wanted to sell. What he wanted to do was create a good cartoon that gave solid moral lessons to children, and that's why he fought against Mattel just about every step of the way when it came to inclusion of things. Was it a neat vehicle if they wanted to sell it? Yeah, he'd use a neat vehicle because they're creative people in general. But the entire show's purpose, although it did succeed in selling the toys, it did so in a way that a lot of people don't want to give things like that credit for. It made people want the toys because they liked the characters. Mm-hmm. Nobody just organically buys an action figure 9 times out of 10, especially not continue to interact with it 40 years later, because I just like the action figure.
Yeah.
The reason why Skeletor... Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. If I could interject, like, this has a similar feeling of the Star Wars, like, Force of Destiny or whatever line. And if, where they make a lot of female Star Wars characters that, as action figures from all the different eras. But the problem with that, with the exception of Ahsoka, for the most part, it's all just, like, white girls with brown hair and brown eyes. Leia's like that, Rey's like that, Padme's like that. So you don't really get a lot of diversity in the actual it's a good idea. It's I understand the point of the idea of it is, but just wait a little bit, guys, until Star Wars itself has a more diverse, female cast besides, all the white people. But anyway, that's kind of what it reminded me of.
But my point is, like, these characters were so loved. Like, for example, the reason why Skeletor is such a meme now, a literal, like, ongoing meme, isn't because some people in the 80s saw an action figure of Skeletor and decided to make memes. No, the memes are based off of Skeletor's personality in the Filmation cartoon. Matter of fact, He-Man historian James E. Talk has gone on record saying that in a documentary done on it, he thinks Skeletor himself is more popular than the He-Man franchise as a whole because of the relatability of those memes. So Lou Scheimer gets that put out. It is a absurdly massive success. Like, people don't really recognize how big of an impact He-Man had on animation as a whole. Because not only did He-Man do this, but then you saw other companies pull into it around the same year. And some of this out of happenstance. Like, for the sake of information, G.I. Joe got reinvented in the same year from the foot-tall, like, Kung Fu grip action figure of the 60s to a 3 3/4 toy line. How do they want to sell it? Well, they initially tried it with comic books, which they did animated commercials for, but then they realized, you know what, now that this has been deregulated, let's put these characters in different stories and see what happens. And it ran for several years. Actually, even ran into the 90s when it came under Deke. Hold on, I gotta get this.
I know, I've been hearing your cat purring, like, in the background for like 10 minutes.
Yes, Gidget, I'll let you in, but you gotta behave. Little gremlin. Anyways, so
it's like, I lied. We didn't have a guess. Sorry, I let me get my joke in. So I was like, I lied. We didn't have a guess. It's Lio's cat. So
yes, her name is Gidget, and she can be sweet, but she's a destructive little force. But when people started recognizing what animation could do in terms of sales and everything else, primarily promoted by the storytelling they allowed, because a lot of things people don't recognize, especially in the modern age when they look back at these things. Well, why doesn't He-Man ever hit anything with the sword? Why doesn't He-Man ever directly punch somebody? So let me give you an overview here of why none of that ever happened. Something completely different than you'll see nowadays. Nowadays, if you get a religious group or a bunch of bitty moms complaining about a cartoon, nobody cares. Nobody. That wasn't the way it was in the 80s. In the 80s, you had 3 different groups gunning for children's animation for the most critical of possible reasons. You had religious groups who condemned He-Man because it had sorcery in it and violence. You had the United States government hawking down on it because, well, we need to keep an eye on all this because it might pollute the youth, much like they did for the Comics Code beforehand. And then you have the moral busybody biddies, whose husbands, I guess, were never at home, who kept writing to the other 2 groups about how much this show is damaging them. And if you ever want to see a real whiplash of what American culture is like now, there is an article written about He-Man in a newspaper saying that He-Man is a liberal, limp-wristed show that is going to make children evil or complicit in it because he doesn't kill his enemies. So, these things happen.
I hate how everything like foreign is just labeled liberal sometimes by people who don't know any better.
Well, that's to a point, yeah, but these groups actually had power at that time, and that's what a lot of people don't take in. So they had to be very careful what they put in cartoons in terms of the violence, the messages given, and some people will say that the PSAs and whatnot, well, it was just to buy these people off. It was just put at the end as something at the end. No, while it did curtail some criticism, the reason why Lou Scheimer started that trend was because he cared about children's television. And you can see that in his previous works. The man was very consistent about that. He didn't want to give children harmful messages. He wanted them to learn something, regardless of what show they were watching that he was behind. And that moves on into other shows of the decade. There were some god-awful shows that were made in the 1980s, just like there's god-awful shows that happen here. But the problem I have when people will make the argument about, well, it was made to sell toys. Let's go ahead and assume that every cartoon in the 80s was made to sell toys. They weren't, but let's assume they are. And? Have you ever seen a kid play with a toy? You have any idea how crazy inventive kids can get with action figures? Are you going to now tell me that because it's made to sell a product, therefore it has no creativity? Because if you want a good example of that having long-lasting effects, we move a year forward to 1984. 1984 is when Hasbro, in conjunction with Sunbow Animation and Marvel Studios, created the Transformers. Now, Transformers is something just about everybody in the United States knows about now, due to the Michael Bay movies or whatever. But in 1984, what Hasbro did was they went to a toy fair and they found the Microman and Diaclone toy lines that were in Japan. Neither of these, to my knowledge, had any fiction behind them. But they looked at it and said, this could be a really cool concept. So what they did was they got the toys together, they laid them out, and they had comic industry veterans Bub Budiansky and Jim Shooter create character profiles and bios for all these toys. So the idea of no originality or no creativity while they are literally making up a story that is cohesive to start putting these things out there to create a comic line and a cartoon. No, these things absolutely had creativity in them. They had to be very careful because of the aforementioned things, as well as television guidelines, which were a lot more stringent now, or stringent then rather than they are now. Like, I'm just going to be very blunt there, because a lot of people, again, they don't recognize it. So they see some things happening, and they think it's campy or goofy, but that's how it had to go. They didn't have a choice. And about 150 shows that were syndicated came out in that decade. Syndication is essentially running an episode every day for a calendar year, essentially, to try to get the ball going. Back in the day, they did not have streaming. We didn't even have internet. So what did they do? These corporations who did the licensing aspect of it would try to sell these shows to different news stations, different television stations, because that was the big thing at the time. It was television. And He-Man was really hard to shop around for at first because it was brand new. Nobody wanted it, but when they finally got it aired out there, boom, it took over the entire market. And then we cut to the next year, 1985. That's the year Thundercats came out. Thundercats was developed by Ronkenboss. For those of you listening who don't know what Ronkenboss is or don't remember it, if you've ever seen the 1977 animated Hobbit or The Last Unicorn or Flight of Dragons, that was created by Ronkenboss. Now,
yeah,
the way that show came about, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if for those playing at home too, Rankin Bass is probably most famous for its Christmas stop motion stuff.
Yep.
So, Rudolph and Year Without a Santa Claus and all that is Rankin Bass specifically. But, like we talked about in the Rudolph video I made like 2 years ago, Rudolph himself is actually owned by a third party. I think that was licensed for the Rankin Bass stop motion, and then the 1999 or 98 thing with John Goodman or whatever. So he's kind of an anomaly to all of that canon, if that's what you want to call it. But anyway, continue. Yep. That's kind of off topic.
Now, what happened was Leisure Concepts, who, fun fact, your audience would know as 4Kids now. Leisure Concepts was at a pitch meeting, and I can't even remember what it was about. And there was another person there who had a folder that was given to him of a concept called Thundercats. It was created by Ted Wolfe, who was a United States veteran, an inventor, and they really liked the concept the concept art they had there. Because it was just the art. There was nothing else there. So what happened was Jules Bass of Rankin Bass really liked it, just in concept, the name, all that. So he passed it on to Leonard Starr. Leonard Starr was known for, oddly enough, not his science fiction work, but for a series of comics called On Stage, as well as Orphan Annie. That's what he was known for. So he wrote a story Bible, which is the treatment for the series. He wrote the first 4 episodes, and a whole bunch of art was done. But all his writing was done within like a day. The man was a complete animal. So they wind up deciding that the way that they're going to do the animation is the way they did in their previous stuff. And they were initially going to go through Topcraft. But the problem with Topcraft, who did all the aforementioned, like, traditional animation stuff I just mentioned, had actually had a split that year. So they were working on Thundercats and they split. The two halves, one became Pacific Animation Corporation, which continued to work on Thundercats, Silverhawks, Tiger Sharks, the Street Frogs, Karate Cat, and the other half became Studio Ghibli.
Was the split for creative differences reasons, or was it like an actual were they just expanding,
I believe the latter, but I'm not 100% sure because unfortunately a lot of the people who were there are, well, gone. I'd have to look into it, and I never really had, to be completely honest with you, but that's just where my information about all that comes from.
Did I ask a good question?
You did ask a very good question. But what happened with Thundercats was a little different because Thundercats was not made specifically to sell product. It was made because, like Lou Scheimer, except without the same reasoning behind it, because Lou Scheimer was approached by Mattel, they wanted to create an action-adventure cartoon for kids that would be pro-social values. And that's why Thundercats has only one PSA that was ever made, that was an anti-drinking one, but all the other morals were put into the show directly as the main plot focus. And it was passed by Robert Cuisis, who was a child psychologist. And they had him on staff to review literally every single script to make sure there was nothing in there that could be harmful to children. And if you take a look at the toy line compared to the cartoon, it's very obvious there was no synchronity between the two of them. So the 80s continue on, and we get the Transformer movie, which caused a bit of an issue because they literally killed characters on screen and traumatized my entire generation. You have the Disney Afternoon coming out, which this is where the 80s, despite people calling it the Dark Ages, where we start transitioning, because network executives, toy manufacturers, creative developers are noting animation's not small anymore. It's not just Hanna-Barbera stuff. As good as they were, it's not just Hanna-Barbera stuff. We have space robots. We have a buff dude. We got all big potentials for storytelling all over the place. So that's when they decided, all right, what else can we do here? So Disney decided to start a new wave of television animation with a show called Gummy Bears, which has nothing to do with the fruit snack, although it's even named after that. That was the very first cartoon for what they now call the Disney Afternoon. So if you like any of the Disney animation from the late 80s to the late 90s in terms of television animation, if you like Tailspin, Rescue Rangers, Darkwing Duck, Mighty Ducks, Pepper Ann, Recess, any of those, you could thank the 80s and you could thank Gummy Bears for that. Because Gummy Bears, to my knowledge, wasn't... It did have a toy line, but it wasn't really something marketed very well. So then you start seeing its ability for storytelling more in terms of like ongoing stories or even some of the more mundane stuff, which gives a rise to, in the early 90s, things like the cartoons on Cartoon Network, because Cartoon Network came out in 1992. specifically just for cartoons, so it gave rise to that. It gave rise to the Nicktoons, because people are recognizing that animation isn't beholden to action-adventure, it's not beholden to comedy, you can do whatever you want with it. Which is what essentially kicked off what we're still dealing with now, which leading into all the way to streaming stuff, to where now we have much more varied stories, you have a much more varied cast, and people like to dunk on the 80s for some of its shortcomings or some things that couldn't be done, but they don't really recognize why that was. So since I'm most knowledgeable about Rankin Boss and Thundercats, I'll go ahead and put it out in a way that some people will understand. In 1984, they started working on Thundercats. It premiered in 1985. In 1986 was the second season for Thundercats, but Rankin Boss, wanting to reignite that same fire that they got for the interest in Thundercats, decided, well, we need to expand more. Because what corporation doesn't expand more when they have a success? Mm-hmm. So in the same year they are doing the second season of Thundercats, they're doing the first season of Silverhawks and the first season of Tiger Shark, the Street Frogs, and Karate Cat. Now, for a massive industry like Disney, not a problem. They can get staff all over the place, all at the wazoo. Rankin Boss was a small company. Mm-hmm. It was smaller than Funimation is now. So all the same voice actors, all the same writers essentially worked on all these shows, and they were burning themselves out pretty heavily, which is what led to them not making any more after that, because it just petered out. Thundercats was massive to them. Silverhawks was, and then Tiger Sharks, to put it this way, nobody has Tiger Sharks. Like, in terms of, like, property rights, Warner Brothers has it because they bought the entire Rankin Boss library in the 90s. But, like, you're never going to find a torrent for the entirety of Tiger Sharks. It was not preserved. Not on our end, at least. Like, you were talking earlier about My Little Pony being passed around, like the newer version of it, Gen 5, I think it's called. Like, Tiger Sharks doesn't even have that. Apparently, there's some audio tracks.
Sorry to interrupt. I was talking about when G4 first started in, like, 2000.
G4, that's it. Yeah, Gen 4.
Okay. Yeah, so, but anyway. Continue.
Yeah. Tiger Sharks didn't even have that. Like, very few people remembered it. It was never archived to the public. Does Warner Brothers have it? Maybe, but they don't know what they have either. And I can prove that. The way I can prove that is on my channel, they have what they call the Lost Thundercats intro, which it's not. There actually is a Lost Thundercats intro. But the one that's on my channel, because you were talking about how did they shop it around. So I'll go on a tangent here real quick. But that intro is uploaded on my channel. Two versions of it. One lower quality, one that's completely restored in high def. Warner Brothers doesn't know they own it. That has been sitting on my channel gaining money for years, and Warner Brothers has not done a copyright claim, not a copyright counter, nothing, because they don't know they own it. So you were asking, how do these people shop their things around? Well, Leonard Starr specifically, when he made the first 4 episodes of Thundercats, he wrote it as a movie. Literally, he moves from one plot to the next. And that can only be found now in the form of VHS or my BitChute account, because I'm petty like that. That has scenes that did not make it into the televised cut of the 4 episodes that they've done. It has additional scenes, all that stuff. And what he would do is he would use that to shop it around to different networks to see who would be interested in it. Mm-hmm. So, another thing you can thank 80s animation for is the boom of anime. Well, how do I say that? That's a really stupid thing to say, right? You'd think so. Because back in the day, ye old days, the anime nerds, the fellow weebs, would essentially trade VHSs at conventions and whatnot. But what happened was Cartoon Network decided in 1996 that they wanted an action block, like an actual action block. And they combed through their archives. And, well, what can we do, right? We're currently working on the Real Adventures of Johnny Quest, but what can we do to get something out here that will pair with that when it's out? Like, all right, so we have Thundercats, which was a pretty well-known action cartoon in the 80s. So what did they do? They create Toonami, and the first show on Toonami is Thundercats. So what they've learned is perhaps not making our own stuff, but licensing out other people's stuff and dubbing it and whatnot. So then they start bringing in anime. There's an argument about whether Thundercats is. I don't think it is, personally, because it's not created for the Japanese audience. There's not even a Japanese dub of it, despite being completely animated in Japan. But it starts bringing in Dragon Ball, Sailor Moon, Ranma 1/2, Tenchi Muyo, Gundam, Cowboy Bebop, all that stuff. Why? Because back in the 80s, they proved action cartoons can survive in the American market. It was moved to Cartoon Network, opened up on that spot, boom. Never stopped. And now anime is pretty well culturally known here in the United States. Mm-hmm. So the 80s, people like John Kay, this is where I'm getting to him. He cried
and I have a
bitter,
question
angry baby
too,
man tears.
whenever you're
No, go ahead, because I can talk about John K.
So I was
for a moment.
curious if you can go into and maybe like talk about like because I know Ted Turner bought Hanna-Barbera sometime I think in the 80s. So like how specifically did that influence like how they were producing content, and then specifically like I know Captain Planet is like Ted Turner's baby and stuff like that. So like can you talk about that a little bit?
Okay, so the way it influenced animation going forward, even with Hanna-Barbera.
Let me just give some backtrack for people who don't know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
So Ted Turner is, as you've seen, and you can look up Family Guy depictions. He was characterized in early versions of that, but he owns CNN. He's I don't remember how he became rich and famous, but he owns CNN, so he's a big corporate guy, and he actually is. I want to say the godfather of syndication, because he was the first one to kind of prove that you could do that you could take episodes of things that have already aired and re-air them and can have a schedule and develop a new audience for that. So basically Hanna-Barbera kind of folded into Cartoon Network, because that's, Ted Turner Cartoon Network, or is part of the Warner Brothers umbrella, whatever. And that's where you get like 90s Hanna-Barbera, like Dexter's Lab and Johnny Bravo, and there's another one, I think Samurai Jack, that kind of stuff. So anyway, yeah. And he big Southern guy who owns CNN and really likes Captain Planet and really likes Gone with the Wind. So anyway, continue.
Well, in terms of like action cartoons, Hanna-Barbera had some beforehand. Of course, Space Ghost is the most well-known, next to Johnny Quest, which was the first action cartoon in America. Like, period. A lot of people don't give that thing a lot of leeway. They don't give it a lot of respect, but they really should, because it is a very well-done cartoon. Mm-hmm. And we could do the qualifier for its time, but just in general, it's a really well-done cartoon.
Do you want to know a fun fact?
Go ahead.
Fun fact is that Kim Possible's black cargo top is actually inspired by Johnny Quest.
Does not surprise me at all. A lot of stuff has been inspired by him over the years. But you also had the Herculoids, you had all that stuff, but it wasn't as big of a breakout hit as other things that happened in, say, the 80s. So the way it influenced other corporations is not only to invest in animation as a medium in general, but also to play around with what things animation's doing. So, like the animated sitcoms of the day, you had the Flintstones, you had Wait Till Your Father Gets Home, you had a bunch of that stuff. But of course, what did the 80s bring about? The Simpsons. And as much as I don't like The Simpsons, I'm not going to sit here and downplay its effects on the industry or on Americana or what have you. But when it comes to syndication, when it comes to how it pushed the industry further, it even impacted Hanna-Barbera. Because what did Hanna-Barbera make in 1993? Well, they made SWAT Cats, which was completely different than literally anything they had ever done before, both in art design and tone and style. And you brought up Captain Planet. Fun thing about Captain Planet. Is it Ted Turner's baby? 100%. But what's interesting is why it was made. Ted Turner was always big on, the environment, but he cites Captain Planet as one of his favorite shows because of how positive it is. But the reason shows like SWAT Cats got canceled is because he shot himself in the foot in a speech that he gave about how Hanna-Barbera cartoons, they're wholesome, family-friendly cartoons. We don't have anything that like depicts heavy violence or destruction or anything like that. And meanwhile, SWAT Cats are taking out villains and blowing up buildings and killing characters, and so he had to pull the plug. And it was expensive. I think that was actually the main reason, because it was expensive to produce.
Yeah, it's another example of people who talk about animation who don't really know about animation. But like, I also want to give credit for Ted Turner, because he kind of like was more lax than I think some people could be in that time period. But at the same token, I think like Captain Planet is a really good example about like making really one-dimensional characters and one-dimensional villains, and like everyone's bad who pollutes and everyone who's good recycles, and it's that black and white. And I'm like, no, it's not. So
well, no one ever commented on Captain Planet for its nuances, but they did the best they could at the time. But when I was talking earlier, I was talking about John Kricfalusi. John Kricfalusi was an animator on Filmation, And he hated it. He hated it because he didn't like the way they were doing cartoons. It wasn't the Bob Clampett style. And the funny thing is, I have people tell me, the 80s was terrible for animation. The 80s was terrible for the industry. Maybe in the sense of the workload. Yeah, definitely some problems there. Not going to deny that. Still a problem today, actually. But when you look at the people who were happy with the work they did versus the people who complain about it, there's a definite bias in terms of, like, number-wise. The people who were happy with their stuff severely outnumber the people who weren't. So, because I've talked to some of these people. John Kricfalusi's problem is that he's a moron who thinks everything should be his way or no way. And he is the only man I have ever heard Lou Scheimer say anything negative about publicly. To this day. Of course, he's gone now. But he said, well, if he didn't want to work there so badly, why'd the moron stay? So, going on after that, a lot of people who are into animation now that are, like, older tend to piggyback off of what a lot of things John put out on his blog about the 80s, which is stupid to begin with if you look at it outside of the vacuum that he's created. Because when you talk to people who were in the industry, and I've talked to people like Flint Dilley, who worked on Transformers, Jim and the Holograms, basically anything under Hasbro's market. I've talked to a few people who have worked on other 80s cartoons. I've talked to Larry Houston before. I've talked to Kirk Bozigan, who worked on the G.I. Joe toy line. They all loved the work they were doing then. There was, of course, problems within, as any workplace will have. Looking at Hear the Roar, a book about Thundercats, the production therein, a really great book. One of the writers, Peter Lawrence, said that one of his biggest issues wasn't even to the production itself. It was to the sheer amount of letters he would get that were angry, calling him a Satanist because of how he wrote Mum-Ra, who's a villain. So a lot of the problems that people aren't noticing that happen in there, they're not noticing because they don't know about the landscape at the time, because they just assume that perhaps what's going on now in the 2020s is how it was in the 80s, and it wasn't. A show like Owl House would never have survived in the 80s. Mm-hmm. Is that because the animation's bad or the storytelling's bad? No. It's because of the subject material. That would not have passed muster. They had a hard time with Dungeons and Dragons as a cartoon. He-Man constantly got put under fire because it had a sorcerer as the main villain. Like, people really genuinely do not know how big television was at that time and the type of power these groups had and the type of nonsense they could pull off. Like, they just genuinely don't. So maybe a little more research and less talking heads might help them. Because if you have anybody talking trash about 80s animation that's like under 40, they probably don't know what they're talking about in general because they didn't even live through it. They didn't live through watching the Senate raise a fuss about Night Trap, the video game. Like, it's completely foreign to them. Like, now you can have gay characters, you could have non-binary characters, you could have like death that you can't skirt away from one way or another, or that you have to worry has to get past the censors. You couldn't have any of that. You could sneak it in. Like in the first episode of Thundercats, you are explicitly told, hey, the ships that are being destroyed is filled with a bunch of refugees who aren't even combatants. So they're literally murdering people on screen. But that's just in voice. You don't see it. Now you can do it. You couldn't have like that scene in Amphibia where the girl gets literally ran through with a sword. That you could never have gotten away with. Now you can, because the restrictions are a little more lifted. You got streaming going on now, which is a completely different set of standards. The 80s were only a dark age in so much as there was only so much they could get away with. And that's not the fault of the people working on the project. It's the fault of everybody else at the time who were dogging on them for it. People really need to recognize and understand that, instead of just saying, well, made to sell toys, therefore bad. Mm-hmm. Here's the truth of the matter. There's not a single thing put to you alive that is not trying to sell you something. The guy telling you about his negative experience with a cashier at Walmart is trying to sell you the idea that that person was in the wrong and they were in the right. Mm-hmm. We are currently trying to sell you on the idea that we're right here, or that you should listen to us. Everyone's trying to sell you something. So if the idea is, if you're trying to sell something with your creative idea, that's bad, you are woefully stupid. I'm sorry, but you are. Old man rant over. That was the 80s. It was unique. We had parachute pants, and, well, I still worry about MC Hammer.
Can't touch this. Anyway.
Can't touch what he doesn't have now. He's poor.
Oh, he's poor? How'd he get poor?
I have no idea.
Spent all his money on pants.
Possibly. I know that apparently, like, the guy who played Screech, and I didn't even know this, unfortunately, until after he passed, used to be, like, infamous in He-Man action figure trading groups because he was a dick, because he was a collector of them and he was a dick to everybody.
I also wanted to ask about too, like what was the convention scene like in the 80s? I don't know if you were specifically going to conventions, but I was curious.
Oh, honey, I was born in 85. There's no way I went to conventions.
Okay, then early 90s, like what were the old conventions like? Do you know?
Okay, I didn't start going to conventions until the 2000s. Sorry, my house was a military house, so there was going to be none of that. But I can tell from people I've talked to, the convention scenes were a lot smaller. There wasn't much in the way of networking and communication until the ATT message groups of the late 90s, early 2000s. There was a lot less spectacle and a lot more heart. Like, you would get Bill Finger, the creator of Batman. You would get people going there to see him. They wouldn't go there to see a cosplayer. They wouldn't go there to see a musical guest. It was, this is the guy who made Batman, and I really want to meet him. Mm-hmm. Whereas at conventions nowadays, they try to do it as a showman thing, a spectacle. This is one of my biggest criticisms of anime conventions, especially considering we keep losing people. We just lost Leiji Matsumoto a few weeks ago. Like, they're not investing in getting the people who are older, who have worked on things that have been influential, to conventions for people to meet them. They're spending their money on, well, we need this rock band for the whatever those things are called in the middle of the night. I'm too old, so I don't pay attention to them. Or we need this cosplayer, or we need Funimation voice actor 576.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, it's a lot of it's spectacle. It's a lot of it like, well, people care about this person, so we'll book them. And like, one of the problems I have when I do convention marketing is I have to kind of like backtrack and like explain like, sorry, dog in the background, but I have to backtrack and explain that, no, like, we're kind of everything. And like, if do people want to learn, like, if people want to learn about like industry or like art or whatever like that, and not just like consume people that are voice actors that are only in the booth for 2 hours and then that's it, but it's definitely more, it's a much bigger corporate business, I think, than it has been. So,
and unfortunately, fans aren't often that knowledgeable about how animation really works. So they gravitate towards who does the voice of the character I like. Mm-hmm. Like, there have been many times where, like, I've heard Larry Kinney talking, who did the voice of Lion-O. He'll be asked a specific detail about an episode. He's not going to be able to answer that.
I wouldn't know anything about that. Because the writer is the person who put that in there.
Yeah. He's like, I'm sorry, I voiced the character. I can't give you a deep lore reason. But they never bring writers to these things. You have to find them on Facebook, because that's where all of us old people are. I mean,
and that's kind of the anomaly of like the pony conventions in general, is like they would bring more creative, production crew to the events instead of just like the voice actors, like over and over again. Because like what mostly happened with pony stuff and like or the pony convention scene, especially like in its high day, like 2015-16, is that the convention scene would know like who was most applicable for booking and who wasn't at that point, and it would just like people wouldn't want to save money, because like how basically convention bookings work is you have, like, if you're getting voice actor X, you have to pay for their travel fees, and then usually have to pay them an appearance fee on top of that, as well as they usually keep their autograph money, on top of that. So they're making, which is significantly different from, like, if I go to a convention as a guest, or even, like, just general schmoes. So that's why Andrea Lipman, who plays Fluttershy, is, like, the record holder of doing the most conventions, is because she made herself most available. But, like, you get a saturation of the same people over and over and over again, that you have to kind of switch it up. But like for a fandom that is focused on one show particularly, that can be hard. So, you kind of run out of people to ask.
Yeah. And some of them, like, you're never going to get because they're literally too old to travel or whatnot. Or sometimes they've been burnt because they've been lied to by other conventions. Mm-hmm. For example, there was a convention I went to in the Bryan College Station area back in 2016 that had Alan Oppenheimer and Melendi Britt. Now, the youngins listening to this don't know those names, but Alan Oppenheimer was the voice actor for Skeletor, He also did Falcor and Neverending Story. And Melanie Britt was the original voice actress for She-Ra, but the younger people may recognize her as the voice actress of Gram in Avatar The Last Airbender, Katara's grandma. So they went to this convention, they signed autographs, they were really, really pleasant people. Finds out the guy never paid them. and duck and ran. Nobody's heard from him since. Thankfully, I was able to see him again later on at another convention, but like really great people. And they're not often asked. In fact, the one guy that keeps being asked is the original voice actor for He-Man, but he refuses to show to any convention. And his reasoning is like the, kind of sad, but also like the most wholesome reason is he's told Alan, I'm scared I'm going to disappoint people because I don't look like He-Man. And I was like, well, I don't look like Skeletor, but come on, man. But he's really shy. That's why he never shows.
Gotta get ready for leg day. It's leg day somewhere.
Well, he's in his 80s now. Like a lot of people don't recognize, like, because of the inherent nature of timelessness that these old animations are. Some people don't realize how old some of these people are. So again, like Alan Oppenheimer was in his 30s when he worked as Skeletor. But that was 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. He's in his 80s now. That's why it's important that's why I keep telling people, if there's somebody you admire, whose work you admire, meet them now. Because every person who ever inspired me, gone. And because I never tended to think about meeting these people because of the lifestyle I've lived, that all passed me by. Leonard Starr, the creator of Thundercats, I'm never going to meet him. He's gone. Same with Rankin Boss members, Arthur Rankin and Jules Boss, that are also gone. Not going to meet them either. Ted Wolfe died in 2001. I'm not going to meet any of these people. I've never even been able to meet the voice actor for Panthro because he died in 2017. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to meet any of these people. So while you are young, if you're a big fan of the Owl House or Amphibia or Steven Universe or any of this modern stuff, meet them now while you can. Especially if they inspire you creatively. It's very important. Don't wait till you're in your late 30s like me before you realize, I probably should have met these people at some point. Way to go, stupid.
You'd one job. Well, I guess there's...
that's my old man rant for this episode.
I guess it's, one of the things of being an old man is, like, everyone's just kind of dying around you. So, luckily, a lot of people in my spiel, not spiel, but, like, in my circle are... relatively not too old. Like I would have the one person I think I would have wanted to meet that died even before I started doing stuff is Tony J, and I think he would have been a great convention person guy because he just kind of seems like he has a good I'll just do whatever kind of vibe to him, which but
you seem like it. Him and Lorenzo Music, the voice actor for Garfield, they seem to be really great people just in general. But I've got one more story from the 80s for you.
Okay.
And there's quite a bit of girl power, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. So, in 1986, the Transformers movie came out, and it showed the first ongoing cast member of the Autobot team who's female. There were some in the first or second season that were on Cybertron, but they were only seeing 1 or 2 episodes and gone. RC was introduced. She was voiced by Susan Bloom. So she was in the movie, season 3, and the 3 or 4 episodes that consist of season 4. Susan Bloom wanted to move up from voice acting into a producer role. But of course, it was the 80s. It was not just men ran field, it was a men dominated field, So they're like, all right, well, I guess we'll give you this weird show that's being worked on right now. It's probably not going to go anywhere, but you can have it. Throw her a bone. You know what the name of that show was?
She-Ra?
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Because the first season of Ninja Turtles is 4 episodes. They thought that's all they were going to do. Because that's all Playmates paid for. And, the guy who runs that production studio is like, no, we're not just going to do 4. I will fund this sucker. And did 8 seasons worth. That show ran from 1987 to 1996.
Whoa.
So Susan Bloom's like, yeah, I did Ninja Turtles. She's really sweet. I've met her before. She's really sweet.
Oh Lord, that's a fun betting on the odds kind of story. So
yep.
do you have any other notes you want to end on, I guess, for wrapping? I hope everyone learned about the political cartoon atmosphere of the 80s, but like I wanted to say too, like, I think that's just kind of a, like, as far as the products and stuff like that, I think that's just kind of a general want, if you, like, again, with all this pony stuff, like, if you enjoy these characters, if you if you like were really into them, then wanting to have like a plushie of someone or a doll of someone. Like I have like a very small collection of like fancy like Esmeralda dolls and stuff like that, and like I'm never gonna play with them, but like they're just fun to look at, and they're nice, and they like make me feel like, whoa, Esmeralda. So
yeah, then I'll tell you right now, if you've got something you like, get it now, because right now I'm trying to gear up to do a few reviews of the new Silverhawks figures that Super 7's making, so I'm investing in the vintage stuff for a comparison, and I hate myself because one random character, well, he's not a random, he's a main villain character named Windhammer, and I still do not know why he is, but he's a 5-inch action figure, and right now I cannot find him for less than $450. And I hate it. I don't know why this character specifically, but I hate it. I hate it so doggone much. Yes, Gidget, come here. Come on, you little monster.
Oh, the irony of Toby being quieter than your cat.
Well, Toby can't, I'd imagine, hop into your lap and voice her displeasure.
He's pretty lap sized, but it's kind of hard if my legs are crossed too, so he's just vibing.
Well, I'm sure the viewers will just go, ooh, kitty, and that's all they're going to care about.
Yeah, okay, so I guess that was a good story time. So, I guess we can wrap. So, Lio, I guess you gotta advertise the show more often. I come up.
Clearly.
You come on, and we gotta replace all the art assets, and I'm doing my part. Well,
need to do mine. You're absolutely correct. I apologize.
No, I'm kidding. Well, I'm joshing with you, but yeah, if you like the podcast, I think like the YouTube channel gets some traffic sometimes. I don't know. So just keep on listening, recommend it to a friend, I think is the big thing. Like in my hack video, which will eventually get made, I'll be like, hey, like, we would like growth. Like I appreciate everyone who's tuning by, but like growth would be nice too. So like we're on all the platforms. We're still trying to kind of get back to a schedule, so that probably means I have to record some episodes with someone else while Lio is away in work mode, essentially. But one of my favorite things is we were going to interview like an indie game development studio thing. Which will happen, like soon-ish. But like basically he's like, sorry, I have to cancel because the French are striking because the government wants to push the retirement age back 2 years, and the French strike if something goes wrong. And then I said, Viva la Revolution, and he's like, yeah. So that's my funnest story so far. So things happen. But yeah, for those like listening to podcasts, like the hardcores, I again really appreciate it. Really appreciate the support. Like we want to keep, the main channel going as long as we, as long as I feel like doing it at least. So spread it, love it, subscribe. I don't know.
Do it. Or I'll show up in your house and stare at you menacingly and tell you to get a job.
Well, I have a job. Get a better one. But yeah, thanks for listening, of course, and of course all the episodes are on. I think this is like we're in the 80s as far as like episode numbers, so there you go. Everything's on theme, so there's plenty of episodes to archive if you're new or whatever. And we're on Spotify and any RSS feed thing that has podcast stuff. So yeah, any other Leo? You want to end on anything else?
Cartoons are rad, and you should watch more of them from various different decades, because if you get a well-rounded understanding of everything and how it works, you'll be better off intellectually, and you'll get to experience things you weren't aware you'd enjoy.
Yeah. And, it's always good to understand why you like the thing instead of just consuming the thing. So, All right, well, we'll see you guys next time on the animation communication, and hopefully we'll have some more art that isn't just like, I don't know if you've noticed, Lio, but for the YouTube videos, like we just slap like a picture of you of a riddle for now. Because
I did.
We're waiting for the loop to be the loop to be remade, but we don't. Guess what? We don't have a lot of editors right now. So like, if you know anyone, hit us up. You know. But yeah, thanks for listening, and I will see you next time on Animation Communication. Now with featuring animals this episode. So.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you so much for listening to Animation Communication on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting provider. We are really hoping the show makes a difference in how people view animation, as well as media as a whole, as well as giving and providing advice for people all over the world who like and want to join the animation and media industry. If you like what you heard, please remember to show support by giving a like, a follow, rating those 5 stars, as well as subscribing to our main I Love Kim Possible a Lot channel on YouTube, and turn your notifications on. New episodes of Animation Communication come out every Wednesday at 6 a.m. EST on podcasting platforms and 4 p.m. EST on YouTube. You can follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at the KP Podcast for information on upcoming guest episodes and more, as well as our hosts KP and Lyle Convoy at I Love KP a Lot and at Lyle Manbad on social media. I'm Lucy, and thank you for being a part of our community. See you next time on Animation Communication.